As we dive into our first session of the day, we welcome a distinguished speaker who is no stranger to the world of advanced manufacturing and digital transformation. With over 25 years of experience, he has been a trusted advisor to numerous companies, guiding them towards realizing the true value of digital transformation in their operations. Recognized by World Economic Forum as a global expert in his field, he is a member of the Advanced Manufacturing Platform and Value Chain. Here to present the Smart Industry Readiness Index, a research-based approach to planning Industry 4.0 transformations. Your applause, please, for the one and only Nicholas Leeder. Nicholas, please join us.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you so much. The stage is yours.
So what a wonderful venue it is, and a great introduction by Mr. Campanago. So today I'm going to talk to you about the Smart Industry Readiness Index. And it's all about where do we start with Industry 4.0. So I'll come on to that in a little bit. Now, I'm going to go quite quickly on this first slide, which is, I've been around manufacturing for over 20 years now, and I can remember terms predating Industry 4.0, phrases like e-business and digital transformation, but in the very early days. And yet we still struggle, 10 years after the inception of Industry 4.0. We are still struggling to really understand what it means and how we get the most value from Industry 4.0. So, as the introduction said, I work with the World Economic Forum around their advanced manufacturing supply chain platform. And WEF, as it's commonly known, is really a place where global companies, institutions, and governments can come together to collaborate and understand the opportunities and the conflicts and the challenges we have around the world. Now, the actual advanced manufacturing platform is made up of over 150 organizations globally. So they're from diverse industries and nations to get the breadth of perspective around what advanced manufacturing means. And the idea of that platform is really to build and connect, to help drive new collaborations, and also help shape the future of what advanced manufacturing means. Now, part of that platform is we set a number of key topics or agendas that help shape and define what we mean by advanced manufacturing and Industry 4.0. Now, there are 6 pillars which have been identified by these 150 companies around the world to try and understand what is driving the future of manufacturing. Now, unsurprisingly, the first pillar is around technology adoption. What is it that is enabling new opportunities? And we'll come on to that in a second a bit more. The next pillar is around workforce engagement. We all know that factories don't run without people, even if it's just the person trying to keep the lights on in a fully automated factory. But the changes, the opportunities that come with Industry 4.0 are significant, but there's new skills that need to be developed and enhanced within the workforces you have within your facilities. But also, we have to approach the changes that come with Industry 4.0 from the worker's perspective as well. And there's work I do with the International Trade Union Confederation of trying to understand from the worker's perspective what Industry 4 actually means, and not just from the technology or the management perspective of it. The third pillar is all around sustainability. As you would expect, we're all driving towards carbon neutrality in 2030. But how do you build full circular economies? How do you actually drive the design of a product all the way through its life to manufacture, its service, and eventually its reuse, its recycle, or its return? We all know about resilient supply chains. We've all had to face those challenges over recent years. But resilient value chains are increasingly becoming important in the global economy. And there is a compass, value chain or resiliency compass, that the WEF produces that guide companies into the major dimensions that they need to consider when looking at resilient value chains. The power of data is everywhere, and we talk on a daily basis now around AI and machine learning. But how do you really harness that data? What data is important? What frameworks will enable data from many different sources to come together so companies can harness and leverage the value of that knowledge that sits within their business? So the power of data is one of the critical areas. And then finally, the shared value creation. This is looking at how manufacturing can become more distributed, that can actually enable local economies to prosper where they've never prospered before, with the use of new technologies such as additive manufacturing, or some people call 3D printing. You know, manufacturing and the way you produce stuff can be dramatically transformed, giving opportunities to local communities that never existed before. So the breadth of those pillars are not just looking at fundamentally the technology within organizations, but also how they affect the environment around them. But what we know is that actually technology adoption is one of the key enablers to give us these new opportunities. And we talk a lot, an awful lot, about the technologies needed around Industry 4.0. You know, we talk about IoT. We talk, as I said a moment ago, around AI and machine learning. The problem is, as I said, a decade later, we're stuck in this paradox. What we see is absolutely, and this is from a McKinsey report, absolutely, the use of digital technology and Industry 4.0 is perceived by leaders in the manufacturing industry as absolutely critical to maintain their operations and keep it running. And yet, everybody's stuck in this pilot trap. Nearly 3/4 of these businesses are still trying to demonstrate the technology. Does it work? Not, does it add value? If something works, it doesn't necessarily add value. And that is really, really critical, because the thing is, we don't see scale. What we see is technology being deployed, proven, but not scaling. So we've got to get to value. There's got to be a consistent way. This technology is also kind of tied up here. We need to shift that balance. Nearly a third of technologies are now reaching scalable positions. The cybersecurity areas, and I'm sure Jeff will come on to a bit more in IoT analytics as well, because we source this information from them. But what was really interesting when I looked at this report was the fact that the actual use case adoption at scale, that's the key, at scale, was below that of the technology adoption. The things you do with the technology is not scaling at the same rate as the technology itself, which means, again, the value is not there. We're proving the technology, we're not getting the value. So where do you start? Where do you start with these future technologies, these opportunities? Now, I'm speaking to an international audience here, so this could be a little bit complicated, but I always use this phrase. Hopefully everybody's familiar with the Muppets. But trying to understand digital is like, for so many people, for many companies, is like trying to smell the color 9. It's meaningless. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So where do you start? What do you do? So most companies will have some form of strategy in their business around Industry 4. Most companies will be remiss if they didn't. But how do you challenge that strategy? Could it make sense to do that as well? I mean, these are the questions a lot of my customers are going and working with, the people, our companies I work with for. How mature am I? Am I starting at the start of my journey, or do I have points of really high level of maturity in my organization? How do I compare myself to competitors? How do I shape up? Am I best in class? Am I at the bottom of the pile, or am I somewhere in between? And if I look at Industry 4.0 and its relatively vague definition, but what dimensions do I actually need to look at first? Where should I focus on? Because no company has infinite resources to invest in these things. And that's where Smart Industry Readiness Index comes in. It has an acronym, by the way, and everybody's mobile phones will suddenly trigger off because the acronym is SIRI. But the Smart Industry Readiness Index was founded by the Singaporean Economic Development Board. And in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, the International Centre of Industrial Transformation, or INCIT. It's also in collaboration with companies like Siemens, Tuv Sud, and McKinsey. And the whole idea of that was really to help companies on that journey, help them identify where to start, what to start on, and why they should start. There are the framework that sits behind SIRI gives an overall maturity status, but it's based on a really defined focus framework. There are 16 dimensions, and I will come on to those in a second, where they use this to compare organizations, compare maturities, and break down this vague term, Industry 4.0, into more discrete and defined areas that you can assess yourself, compare yourself against. We talked about industry and best-in-class benchmarking. I mean, it gives you that comparison, not just about peers, but governments can use this to compare the maturity levels of manufacturing in their organizations. In fact, a lot of investment has been recently made in the Middle East with Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and other countries. In fact, even last week, I think, Azerbaijan, it's quite a complicated word to say, but they are all starting to adopt at a national level, and I work with the UK government, the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, to start to adopt SIRI as a national way of understanding the maturity of industry in that country. But also we can take that in industrial levels, so there are different industries we can look at. But the most important thing about the SIRI framework, it focuses on value and it focuses on outcomes. It's those things which will drive the scaling of Industry 4.0 and will demonstrate not just the technology works, but it creates value within the organization. So I want to start looking at the framework. How is SIRI broken down into the different building blocks, the components that make up this assessment? So there are 16 blocks, but ultimately, no good framework in this space doesn't start with process, technology, and organization. It's been around forever. Those three are the fundamental pillars of these frameworks. But the building blocks, the pillars that come beneath it are then breaking that down into the next level of detail. Now, in technology, what level of automation can you achieve? What connectivity is required to enable Industry 4.0? How do you use intelligence, data? But also importantly, not just on the process side and the technology side, but the organization. Do you have the right people, the right skills within your organization to harness and maximize the potential around that? Have you structured yourself as an organization to actually adopt and use this? Are the right people empowered? Do they have the right budgets to actually execute and the right authority to drive the changes and help enable those changes within the organization? And then the 16 dimensions break below that around, the vertical, horizontal integrations, looking at how the information around the product goes through its life. And I will make a quick call out. A lot of people talk about product lifecycle in terms of the engineering and manufacturing. But increasingly, this goes into the aftermarket and the service and how the information flows through the life of the product. Looking at the way that technology flows through different tiers of the organization. And as I mentioned around talent readiness and structure management, all the right elements to make any changes you plan to do around Industry 4.0 make a difference, stick, and go forward. And it's those 16 dimensions which we perform the SIRI assessment on. We go into organizations, we speak with people, we get the data against those elements, and we start gathering and understanding organizations' maturities and readinesses around these areas. And the outcome is really twofold. The first one is your maturity, your benchmarking against those 16 different dimensions. Why is that so important? Well, that really helps you understand, in here we've just got a standard one which has the bottom 10%, the upper 10%, and the 80th percentile. Where do you sit against your peers in your industry? Are you above the curve, behind the curve? But that's also not enough. If you're behind the curve, how is that going to actually influence outcome? How is that going to influence return on investment that you make in Industry 4.0? But understanding your maturity helps you understand your relative strengths and weaknesses. And this, there is over 3,000 assessments now across industry. I think we're getting up towards 5 now around this. So there is a real wealth of knowledge and experience that's locked into these assessments. And as I said here, you can then start looking at your industry. So if we elevate this upper level from your organization, where does your industry live? What is the level of maturity you have against those dimensions? But also, what's the level of variance? How standardized is it? Because the more standardized we get around Industry 4.0, ultimately will enable us to scale that more effectively. The overall goal is to drive this through one workshop. So the whole premise of SIRI, and I've worked with some other frameworks in my career, they can be incredibly labor-intensive and run over months, many, many months, and often come out with a report about that thick that you have to kind of get through. But this approach is, we're going to deal this in one workshop. Critical to get the absolutely right people involved in this in your organization, but we can guide around that. And there's framework around this. So we do an assessment on the matrix itself. It is with your people. It is understanding, getting their feedback, getting their understanding. But very, very quickly, we move from the assessment into the prioritization dimensions. What is going to drive where you start? First of all, it's understanding how the costs are built up in your organization. What will drive the maximum benefit if we start to address those areas? What are the key performance indicators? Are you looking at productivity, flexibility, quality, or speed? Those KPIs and connecting those back into those cost profiles and cost drivers, which are then linked back to that assessment. So again, what we're doing now is not just looking at technology. We are driving that connection between technology, technology maturity all the way back to the financial outcomes it can drive. And then looking at the results and identifying your gaps against the different industries that we've got mapped, measured within the framework. The end result of that assessment is the report. The report gives those different dimensions and helps you understand where to start. It gives ideas of the top 4 dimensions you need to focus on and why as an organization to drive the maximum benefit of any investments that you make around Industry 4.0. And it also provides not just those areas to assess, but why, what can you do, and uses the experiences of the assessors to really guide you on those first practical steps of the changes and the opportunities that Industry 4.0 provides you. And I mentioned a moment ago, having worked around some of these frameworks in my career, speed is of the essence here. You don't want to be spending 4 to 6 months doing a very expensive assessment, coming out with a very big report, but with really little clear guidance and understanding. With Siri, this can be delivered in literally 6 weeks. Now, we have to get things kicked off with some briefing calls, get everybody aligned, but really it's because it's framework, it's a standardized approach. We've done it many, many, many times before. We guide the customers through every single step. Every manufacturer goes through the same steps. We gather the right information. We support the customers in gathering that right information. Then we have that magical workshop, typically done in one day, where we do the assessment, and then we go through the prioritizations of cost, the prioritization around the other areas. And that means that we end up having the final result and the briefing and the debriefing. Now, from that, we identify the opportunities where Industry 4.0 can go, and we then start working around putting those changes in place and launching those programs back down to key results and value. I want to bring this to life a little bit. In the UK, we partner with LMAC, a local consultancy business, in running the smart industry assessments. And this is a case study around a precision manufacturing business. And they were a growing business. They were actually growing and scaling. But the problem is, as you go through that, you have challenges. Their OTIF, their on time in full, was being really challenged. It was down to 70-odd%. They were in that position of firefighting multiple issues. And their product complexity was growing. Now, using the assessment, one of the priority areas that we identified very, very quickly was around using advanced planning and scheduling technologies, or APS. And that would have a direct impact on OTIF. So it was scoped very quickly. And after a few months, you can see some of the benefits that really came through. Now, there was around about a 14% uplift in OTIF and continuing to improve towards that target of 95%. There were spy products that I hadn't expected. They were actually able to increase capacity by 15% by doing this. This all came from that first survey, identifying those opportunities and collaborating with the customer and the manufacturer. Now, I would be remiss to say they've started their journey. They're on their journey, and now they're moving towards more automation, and they're moving now towards a manufacturing execution system in that step. So they didn't start with the biggest technology. They started with something that's very practical, and they started with something that had a direct impact into their business. So, I've talked about the framework, I've talked a bit about where, but how ready are we? Well, globally, when we look across the board, those benchmarks are ranked between 0 and 5. Industry is somewhere around 1.5, just over 1.5. That means really that we're kind of moving from that first stages of Industry 4.7 being defined on an aggregate level to the first stages of being digitized. There are some industries that are more advanced than others, but globally, we're just moving from defining to digitizing 10 years after the inception of Industry 4.0. So we've got a long way to go still for that panacea of automated factories everywhere around the world, the high-value labor creating a lot of economic value is there. We're using, everything is connected and communicating together. So we need to look at how we accelerate it. And that's where we really believe that Siri is going to help. It does provide, ultimately, a holistic view on where to focus your investments in Industry 4.0, be that process, technology, and organization. It's quick, and it's easy to do. That's important, because nobody has the time and resources to invest massively into a kind of theoretical research. But it also helps you increase awareness within the organization. So many times I go into organizations and I work with the chief operating officer or the chief technology officer that wants to talk and do Industry 4.0, and then you sit down with the chief financial officer who has very little understanding of what that really means. So by using the Siri assessment, you can actually raise the awareness and gain the buy-in. But it doesn't just have to be at the top floor. The same level of opportunity can be used to communicate how things will improve on the shop floor and how it will make a difference to the workers that use these technologies on a daily basis. You can compare your maturity. You understand where you sit against your peers, but you also understand where you sit, which is against what is important to you. So we can take a competitive view and say, if I do this, it will add a huge value to me, and it will also improve my competitive position in a market as an organization. There are very little resources in organizations to make these changes. So it helps you, again, prioritize those efforts. Where to start first? What will create the most value in my organization? But it doesn't stop at the report. It then allows you also to track the changes. You can go back in a year's time, rerun the assessment, compare the progress you've made, and use that to introduce a continuous improvement process of always advancing, always changing, because the dynamics in any organization and any market changes over time. So really, I feel that industry, the Smart Industry Readiness Index, or SIRI, really has a critical role to play now in helping organizations take their first steps towards that Industry 4.0 journey. Crossing that bridge, I think Mr. Campolago mentioned, from TRL 4 to 9. How do you use this technology, and how do you get it to an industrial scale? How do you get value from it as fast as possible? And use Siri as the catalyst to drive this within your organization and add significant value going forward. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, if you're interested in Siri, please feel free to grab me, and I can talk to you all day about it if you really want to, but a few minutes, and then let's see what we can do and drive together the changes in Industry 4.0 forward. Thank you. Thank you, David.
So value, outcomes, and scaling. Is that it?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Cheers.
Thank you. Your applause again for Nick.